Modern Horizons blue cards.
Next on Eternal Turtles.
Hey, I just want to give a quick shout out to all of our Patreon supporters out there. Thank you to the Dirtle Maniacs. If you want to be a Dirtle Maniac, go to patreon.com/EternalDirtles and help support the channel. It keeps things going. It keeps things updated. Thanks so much for watching. On with the show.
Hello and welcome to Eternal Turtles. I'm your host, Zach Clark, and with me as always, Phil Blackman. Phil, how's it going, man?
Zach, I still don't understand, man. Why is there no Magus of the Sensei's top in this set? What is happening?
Yeah, you would think that they had power balance. You would think that they would come up with Magus of the Sensei's Divining Top at this point. But alas, foiled again. We'll have to wait till Modern Horizons 4. Or, I don't know, what is next year's, maybe they'll put it out in Assassin's Creed.
Dude, is there a Marvel character that just could be Sensei's top? That is just Professor X?
Is it just Professor X? Power Leech would be a good choice. Power Leech is very much the Fibblethip of that universe.
Let us pray.
All right. Well, so we're going to start with the Flip Planeswalker. Tamiyo, Inquisitive Mind, is a 1-mana legendary Moonfolk wizard, 0/3 with flying. It has, whenever it attacks, Investigate. Y'all know what Investigate does. When you draw your third card in a turn, exile Tamiyo, then return her onto the battlefield transformed. That transform is a legendary planeswalker with a loyalty of 2 that has a +2. Whenever until your next turn, whenever a creature attacks you or planeswalker you control, -1, -0 until in turn. So like the Jace Architect of Thought text, basically. -3 will be return target instant sorcery card from your graveyard to your hand. If it's green, add a mana of any color. Okay, that's the Semic part of this card. -7, draw cards equal to half the number of cards in your library. Round it up. You get an emblem with you have no maximum hand size. Phil, what do you think of this card?
I think it's awesome.
You like it, okay?
Awesome. Yeah, I mean, where this card goes remains to be seen. But I mean, it's another one of those cards that is just going to make the play draw really, harsh because.
But not like Ragavan harsh,
No. It's not going to be Ragavan harsh, but it will be similar in that like I play this card and then you go. And then if you don't remove it immediately, if I get an attack in, it's already replaced itself, and then it will just continue to threaten to draw a card every turn. So, like, while a 1-mana Ophidian is not like gonna, break the game in any meaningful way, if this gets in, like, if on my turn, if I get a second attack in with this thing and investigate a second time, like my 1-mana putting draw a card twice onto the table is just like it's very powerful. And also the fact that like if you let me untap with it, then your removal is not necessarily guaranteed anymore because you have to just presume that a Brainstorm blanks your removal. So if I get to untap, attack, investigate, and now I'm holding up 2 mana, which theoretically represents that card. If you tap out, then I know that your removal is theoretically off unless you're in a Solitude deck. So I can then, crack that clue, draw a card, continue my development if there's development to be had in the matchup. But if I can also just not move if you don't move, and then your removal can't be turned on unless you are willing to fight over Brainstorm, drawing additional cards to flip this thing at instant speed. So, like I think that's where I haven't heard anybody talk about really is like the play pattern of like what being able to flip at instant speed actually looks like. Yeah. Because if I have mana open, you now have to respect me being able to flip it at instant speed, but I control the narrative because if I get to attack with this thing, I just get to draw a card. So you are compelled to act, but you being compelled to act means that I get to respond to blank that compulsion, and then you just get wrecked. So, and all of that is I had a blue mana, which is not really difficult in this format. Yeah. So the idea of being able to function at instant speed while also accruing value for 0 mana that this card allows you to do is really powerful. And that is not even to like get into the space of it's generating an artifact, and what can you do with artifacts,
Sacrifice them for cards is the answer. I think this card gives us a weird play space, like a fun weird play space that also, it seems like a kind of card you're going to want to fight over. You know, you don't want your in a game where the number of cards in your opponent's hand over the course of the game matters. I think this is interesting, and it obviously dodges Orcus Bowmasters, so there's that. The Planeswalker part, like, I'm not super excited about any of the text over on that side, aside from like the draw half your deck, which I feel like you'll rarely do. But I mean, I've ultimated Jace, Architect of Thought a few times. It feels pretty good. So
yeah, it is also it is functionally like the fact that it's a 1 mana a card that flips into this walker that can threaten to win the game. Yeah. Like like the draw half your deck have no maximum hand size, so it's like, okay, my hand is just going to be 20 plus cards for the rest of the game. Yeah. Like the game is functionally over at that point, right? We'll just be in garbage time. So it just depends on how difficult is the will of your opponent to break at that point, because the game will functionally be over.
Assuming you have enough life to untap, yeah.
Yeah. But like the fact that this thing can just plus and threaten the game ending in that way means that all you have to do is be able to present to them any other win condition, and otherwise you can't lose. Yeah. So in that way, it is still really it is still relevant that it has the ultimate that wins the game on it, or functionally wins the game on it, because your opponent will have to respect it if it is ticking up at +2. And the other side of that too is that it's +2, and if you're not actually affecting the loyalty at all, if you ultimate this thing, go up cards, Tamiyo still stays on the table. So that's also not nothing. I think that the one aspect of this card that I haven't heard people talk about too is it's also another playable wizard. And that means that like those Flame of Anor decks that people were experimenting with early on when, they were doing the Sleep Cursed Fairy as a way to get additional wizards into their deck. And then that card proved to like not be quite up to snuff because it's a bit too slow and the format's way too fast because you never actually get to turn 3. That it's like, maybe this card is the additional wizard that you needed. And being able to like do that with your Flame of Anor shenanigans is like, oh, now there's like an actual shell here to like do this sort of, control-y style, maybe a little bit more aggressive style deck.
Eternal Durdles is sponsored by Tales of Adventure. You can go to toamagic.com, use the code DURDLES for 5% off your order, and you're going to get that whole order in one package. No more waiting for 5 or 6 or 12 packages to show up at your door so that you can finish your deck. toamagic.com, code DURDLES for 5% off, and you'll be directly supporting the show. Yeah. All right. Well, I'm going to go off the script for a second because so much of what we'll be talking about will be based on this one card. I'm going to skip to Tune the Narrative. Tune the Narrative is a 1 blue mana instant that says draw a card, you get 2 energy counters. Phil, take it away.
Yeah, so we talked about this on the episode about white cards, where it's like any of the reasonable energy cards in the format, if they're not used as a combo card, so like Guide of Souls theoretically could be a combo card in some capacity because it has some shenanigans with creatures entering the battlefield and giving you energy, and maybe there's a payout for that to like create a loop of some kind. But if you're looking at any of the other cards that just like ask for energy in any capacity, then you're going to be looking at Tune the Narrative as the means for it to actually be, for those cards to be playable. So like when we get into red, there's a removal spell that like generates 3 energy and then can remove a target, but it can't go face. So it's like, okay, if your deck that is playing Bolt also doesn't want to play Unholy Heat because you don't want to actually have a spread of cards for Delirium, then maybe you look into energy. And if you're looking into energy, then you kind of have to look at Tune the Narrative as thus the generic, just do a good thing card that doesn't
the glue that holds it all together. Yeah.
It's like instant speed draw card is just like the baseline of whatever, like the baseline of not asking you for anything really to be able to then do this thing that is otherwise enabling all of these other cards, where something like the Galvanic card in red that generates energy, it needs a target. And if you don't have a target fired off, then you can't actually use it as a reliable enabler. Where it's like you will always be able to draw a card unless there's something that specifically says you can't draw a card. But even if you can't draw a card and just want the energy, like let's say a Narset's on the table, you could theoretically still just use this. You just don't draw a card, but you will still get the energy because the energy is not contingent upon you drawing the card. So it's like if you're playing any of the energy cards in this set in a meaningful way that's not that like actually is interested in the energy part, and we talked about Wrath the Skies in the white episode, and it's like that one you could theoretically do it for X = 0 because you just want a meltdown effect. But if you actually do want the energy of any of the like energy aspect of any of those cards, you do need Tune the Narrative.
Yeah.
In my point of view, you need Tune the Narrative in order to enable those cards. And then the bottleneck doesn't become whether or not you have enough energy. Really, the bottleneck will be, do you have enough slots in your deck to allow for Tune the Narrative as the enabler for those cards?
Yeah.
And that's where then you have to figure out what your slots look like, your flex slots look like. But Tune the Narrative will see play if any of those other cards see play.
Yeah.
I will be testing out a bunch of Tune the Narrative because I really want to test Static Prison, but that is a perfect example. I'm not interested in testing Tune the Narrative. I'm interested in testing Static Prison.
The other cards,
and by extension, I need to play Tune the Narrative. Yeah.
Yeah. So to that end, then I want to also quickly jump into Aether Spike as a card to talk about. Aether Spike is a 2-mana instant that's 1 and a blue for an instant. It says choose target spell. You get 2 energy. Then you may pay any amount of energy, counter target spell unless its controller pays 1 mana for each energy paid this way. What do you think?
It's unplayable. Totally unplayable.
We don't need a mana drain when actual counterspell exists, right? Like,
well, it presumes that you can actually spend mana on counter magic these days, and you can't.
Yes. All right. So I just wanted to get that out of the way. Those 2 cards specifically because one sort of precludes that maybe you want to play the other, and just to get that out of the way, like Aether Spike is not where we want to be in the format. Let's talk about Brainsurge. We had an episode somewhere pointing to wherever the hell that is. We had an episode where we talked about Brainsurge in depth, but let's just give it a once over real fast, broad strokes with it. This is a 3 mana that's 2 and 1 blue for an instant. It says draw 4 cards, then put 2 cards back from your hand on top of your library in any order. Brainstorm with card advantage. Phil, what do you think?
So I don't think this is going to move the needle on anything meaningfully in the format, but I am also going to play 4 of it and have already commissioned an Alterist to alter them for me.
Amazing.
So I'm into the card, but I don't actually think it's going to like be a paradigm shifter. What I really would have liked is at 3 mana, it's not good enough. At 2 mana, it's probably too good. So that applies to me that this
2 mana
is probably,
and 2 energy.
if this was 2 mana, it's too good. If it's 3 mana, it's not good enough. So it's probably in the space where it should have cost 2.5 mana, and there isn't really a way to do that.
Yeah.
So what I would have loved for if they're trying to like boon the players like me that really are interested in this type of card, what I really would have liked is if they made it like 1 blue white, had the exact same text, but then also said gain 3 life on it. Essentially,
yeah.
I don't think this is good enough at 3 mana, but it's too good at 2 mana. So in order to make it good enough at 3 mana, give it something else to juice it a little bit, but then you can alter the cost in a way to make it so that actually is a reasonable thing to do. So like if this was 1 blue white, exactly what it says, plus gain 3 life, then we're off to the fucking races, man. Like I am committed to this card for life, right? Whereas like right now, it is very good. Like it will be good for the purposes of like the things that I like to do, but it's not going to be like better than any of the 3 mana walkers. It's not going to be better than any of the other things that you can do at 3 mana in the format as it currently stands. If anybody is playing it in the control decks, you're probably just better off playing Uro. You're probably better off playing any of the 3 mana walkers. You're probably off just playing Beanstalk plus your 0 mana cards that actually cost 5 and 6 to like just draw a bunch of cards and do it better that way. Because this is not going to draw cards better than Beanstalk. It's not going to filter your hand any better than what Brainstorm would already do in the format. So if you're looking for Brainstorm's 5+ whatever, you're probably just looking at other effects unless you specifically need Brainstorm, in which case you're also then fighting this between Jace the Mind Sculptor. And if Jace the Mind Sculptor isn't good enough at 4 with all of its other text, I doubt that this is going to be good enough at 3 with its current text, even if it goes up a card because it's a one-shot. So, well, don't get me wrong, I'm a believer. I will be casting this as a 4 of in my deck for a long time, and it will be altered by the end of the year. Like 100%, I'm in on it. But do I think it's actually like the game changer I'd like it to be? No, it needed to do something that the decks that this card would play, like what I play, it needed to give us another avenue or another access that we didn't have access to, like incidental life gain. Or if it said exactly this text plus, shuffle 2 cards from graveyards into a player's library or something, like literally like any additional something else that is an access that a deck like that this card would want doesn't have access to within its pool at the moment. then it would be something that is like I'm actually a legitimate believer in. Right now, it's just like, nope, this card speaks to me. I love it, but is it good enough? Probably not.
What if it said, draw 4 cards, then put 1 card back on top of your library and another card in your graveyard?
Right. Even if it's an enabler, it would be a worse enabler than anything else.
Fair.
That's what I mean by like, it's like if you wanted to do something like that, like put a card into your graveyard, there are just more effective ways to do it. There are more efficient ways to do
You're
it.
right.
But if the decks that are trying to play this, instant speed card advantage spell while also setting up the top of the library, it needs something in a way to like extend the game or disrupt the opponent in a meaningful way. So if it gained life, or if it prevented damage, or if it stopped, if it had some other effect that applied to some other axis of the game, like that's where the appealing design is. I know that we had talked about like what I really was hoping to see in Modern Horizons was blue-white instant, gain some amount of life, and then exactly Gaia's Blessings text, right? Yeah. Because it's like, oh, instant speed, graveyard disruption, plus gain life, plus draw a card would be really sweet. Now, that's just like not too powerful of an effect. It's totally fine effect that's contingent upon a bunch of contextual parts of the game. And if this did anything... Yeah. And it doesn't exist. And if this thing like dabbled into that space where it's like, okay, yeah, it's like it gains some amount of life and then does the brainstorm thing for 3 mana at instant speed, but otherwise it doesn't affect the board. So like it's not going to be overpowered, but it offers something that there isn't another tool for in the space. So if it was a new tool, that would be sweet. I'd be so hyped for a new tool. Yeah. This is not a new tool. It's just an extension of tools we already have, but it's doing it less efficiently, which is why I don't think it's going to change anything meaningful, but it will be something that you'll see me playing.
All right. Consign to Memory. Speaking of new tools, Consign to Memory is a 1 mana instant with replicate 1 colorless that says counter target triggered ability or colorless spell. So this obviously for 2 mana you could counter Nulamog and his triggered ability as he comes in. What else were you thinking about with this card?
So the reason I'm interested in this card is it being half of a stifle, countering a triggered ability. There are multiple axes why this is the type of card that I would be interested heavily in my sideboard, depending on what the context of the format is, because it has a lot of crossover. So some of that crossover is I have played a bunch of Stifle to stop initiative creatures, right?
Yeah.
Now that sucks. Like that is not good enough of
not
an answer
to
the like Stifle for the initiative creatures is otherwise not good enough. However, if this is a card that's in a sideboard slot that can also at that same extent, also counter the Chrome Mox, or counter a Chalice of the Void, or in some decks, counter a Karn the Great Creator. There is enough crossover, but also this card against specifically something like Initiative to be able to stop the Initiative trigger from hitting, or stop the Chalice of the Void, all for a mana. It's like, maybe there's enough crossover there where it's actually an effective enough tool to warrant a sideboard slot if you want to respect those types of decks. So, in the way that it does it, in ways that no other card has been able to do, like that unique set of things against exactly that kind of matchup, I'm really interested in. And then, of course, you have the aspect of like, if Eldrazi comes back, it is going to be really nice to be able to go
it's a
2 mana counter. Yeah, 2 mana counter your Ulamog from attacking me and also counter the spell, right? Because like we haven't had access to that in a meaningful way before. So like that is also nice, but it is like the real reason that I like this card is specifically exactly for that initiative matchup and or for the like Karn matchups where like being able to hit both Chalice and Karn for a mana is really relevant.
Yeah. Well, an interesting thing to think about this also, Phil, is that like, those initiative decks play Cavern of Souls, right? You don't care about countering the 3/4, right? You really care about the initiative because you can get rid of the 3/4 any day of the week. This counters the initiative even if they cast it with the Cavern of Souls.
Right, which is where the Stifle came in, because you had to respect Cavern. You had to assume that your counter magic sucks. Yeah. But one thing that's also fun about this card is because it has Replicate, let's say the Chalice stuck, you can cast this card and replicate it to get the additional copy through the Chalice.
Yeah, get it through.
So similar to how like Flusterstorm Storm Trigger goes on the stack, so you can play through Flusterstorm through a Chalice.
Yep.
This also has a similar effect where yes, it will steal that mana, but if they get to go turn 1, play their Chalice before you have this online, if the follow up
is relevant,
if you get to the later point in the game where you actually do get to have 2 mana, you can 2 mana this. You can replicate this through the Chalice of the Void, and that's not nothing. Is it good? Maybe not, depending on the play draw and depending on how fast how powerful the draw is. But it's not nothing, and it not being nothing is still more than anything else we have that exists right now. You know what I mean? Like, will this card be the best of its version ever? No. Like, it's still not great because it assumes that you have to be reactive and it doesn't recoup the card and they still get to do the thing that they wanted to do. And even if you traded 1 mana for 2 mana, their 2 mana was off of a soul land, so it's not like you actually traded for anything.
Exactly.
It's an equal land drop. So none of it is actually favorable exchanges. It's just a more condensed version of effects that you would otherwise want to combat those sets of things. Even if it's still not good, it's the best of what we have. So am I excited about the card? No. But is it the best tool for the thing that we don't have any real good, reliable tools for at the moment? Yes. And that's what I'm talking about before with Brainsurge. This is a new tool that we didn't have access to before. Is it good enough? Probably not. But is it better than everything else we've got? Yes. And that's why I'm like excited to like get a set of these to have access to if Boros Initiative comes back in the format at any point.
So you had asked me if I added this card to the list, and apparently I did, but at the time it was called Crying About Birds. Because we didn't get a real name for it yet. So, Crying About Birds is consigned to memory. All right, so let's talk about Dreamtide Whale, a 7/5 for 3 mana. It is a 2 and a blue for a creature whale that has Vanishing 2. Whenever a player casts their second spell each turn, Proliferate, choose any number. Yeah, we know what Proliferate does. So it's a 7/5 for 3 mana, with Vanishing 2, but has ways to keep it in play. I don't think it's good enough, but it is an interestingly large card. And it says proliferate. It doesn't say, like, add a counter to this, you know? Like, so you might be able to use that as a way to, like, get other things going.
Zach, I am shocked at your take. Shocked at your take. Because there are so many times where a card is otherwise laughably unplayable, and you're like, well, I guess you could slot it into Infect.
Yeah, of course. I mean, the answer is Infect.
Even though you and I both know, and everybody listening knows, that when we all know that when all of those other shitty cards will never make it in an Infect, you still present as though, like, maybe we should explore that idea momentarily. And this time around, where it would actually make legitimate sense to, you didn't do it.
I just wanted to troll you a little bit. So we can move on from this card.
You have played True Name Nemesis in your sideboard as a way to pivot around your opponent's, disrupting all of your Phyrexian creatures that would otherwise have Infect as a pivot plan. And that plan, to me, on the outside, I'm sure I voiced it to you, but I always thought that plan sucks shit. And now,
that's a bad plan, honestly.
And now you have a similar space that's a bit easier on your mana, that gives you a 7/5 that also works with the Infect plan if that's still part of your plan post board, but it's also a very thick creature that is not unhappy to have pump spells paired along with it to end the game faster.
Let's also
and it's
add,
blue.
Phil, it's blue, also great, but you can turn to this. Like off of Manador,
Yeah. I'm saying that, like, of all of the pivot plans that you have tried in Infect, all of them historically have always been bad. And this is the first one that is, like, nodding to Infect while also giving you the side plan of, like, oh, this also works with my pump spells in a way that it doesn't suck. Yeah. Because literally 1 pump spell plus Berserk gets this over the 20 damage mark. So, like, if any of those,
it's just a whale, so your Embiggen doesn't work very well with it.
No, but, like, you can still go, if you went, like you said, turn 1 Noble Hierarch, and they have their damage based removal spells to try and fight over your Infect creatures. Well, now instead of your pump spells having to function as counter spells towards damage based removal isn't going to touch this thing.
Nope.
And then you can just go for broke when you feel like when the coast is clear. So,
of course.
Now, is it good enough? I don't know. I don't play Infect to know for sure. But, like, the fact that all of the aspects that lean into that sideboard that pivot that you've tried to do before that has nothing to do with Infect, the fact that this sort of covers that pivot plan that you've explored before while also proliferating nodding to Infect, meaning that, like, oh, it's not, like, totally out of line with everything that you want or that your deck is otherwise doing, like, and then we don't even explore the idea. It's the first time where it would have made sense, man. It's the first time.
All right. You got me. All right, let's move on.
No, dude, I didn't get you. You got you.
You played yourself. All right, let's move on to Harbinger of the Seas, a 2/2 Merfolk Wizard for 1 and 2 blue, non-basic lands are islands. Man, if this card had come out like 10 years ago, I might have won a Pro Tour.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how deeply we have to talk about this card because, yeah, obviously,
It's
Blue Magus of the Moon
obviously Merfolk wants to play this card.
Yeah, well, obviously, Blue Magus of the Moon is good. Like, I don't know if we need to, like, get into that too harshly.
Yeah.
Like, okay, yeah, people play Blue Elemental Bass specifically to, like, make sure that they can deal with Magus of the Moon. Yeah, people will play Pyroblast if in their red decks to, like, deal with this if that becomes a thing. Like, happily, they, like, have finally taken the note, like, hey, maybe be a little bit more conscious about putting 2 generic mana plus Pip. That way, we can actually pay attention to Ancient Tomb a little bit because of that fucking egregious mistake. But, like, okay, yeah, this card's obviously going to be good, and it will be good in the ways that we think it'll be good. And maybe it opens up the door for, like, some other decks. Like, yeah, maybe Merfolk can come back in a more meaningful way because now you don't have to play, like, Tide Shaper or some shit. You can just play, like, this is your 3/of, which is, like, meaningfully disruptive in a really powerful way. And also, like, wrecks all of the decks that you, like, would otherwise have problems with, like, if you can, like, get this in off your Aether Vial to, like, turn off your 5-color Beanstalk opponent from having, like, relevant removal colors, like, also great, right? Cool. Like, this will show up, and it will be good when it shows up, and that's fine, I guess. Like, cool. Like, I mean, I don't know. Like, this card isn't exciting to me. It's just going to be good because it's just a blue. It's just a blue slant of a card that we know is good.
Yeah. Eternal Durdles is proud to be sponsored by Moxfield.com. Moxfield is the best deck building website on the internet. You can find all of my and Phil's decks in links below, including decks from this episode. And if you do, you'll be directly supporting the channel. All right. Kozilek's Unsealing is an enchantment with Devoid for 2 and a blue. And it says, whenever you cast a creature spell with mana 4, 5, or 6, create 2 colorless Eldrazi spawns. They're 0/1s that you can sack for a colorless. And then whenever you cast a creature spell with mana value 7 or greater, draw 3 cards.
So I saw people online, I guess in Modern at least, they were, like, flipping out over this card. But then I saw other people saying, like, oh, this is just better than Up the Beanstalk. And I'm like, are you guys out of your minds?
I wouldn't say this is better than Up the Beanstalk, but I would say
it's not better than anything.
This
is
is
3 mana that doesn't do anything, and then is contingent upon you having a bunch of other shit in your deck that doesn't want a 3 mana do nothing enchantment. Like, if you're playing the stuff that pays this off, your entire deck is committed to getting that stuff on the table, not playing this 3 mana do nothing enchantment. Like, I see this card as entirely unplayable, but I remember when it was first spoiled that people were freaking out. And I was like, if people are freaking out, like, I trust the mass more than I trust myself in a lot of ways for this type of stuff. And I'm like, what am I not seeing? Because to me, this is wholly unplayable.
Well,
but everybody else saw this and lost their minds.
Phil, for me, it is, they just printed a new Mirror Enforcer. Is that what that card is? Mirror Enforcer? That's 7 mana.
Okay, so I guess people are talking about it in just Affinity?
Affinity,
so
yeah. So, like, imagine I have a bunch of baubles, right? Throw those baubles down. I get just enough mana that I can cast my... I have this out, like, on turn 2 or whatever. And then I fall up with a 4/4 that draws me 3 cards. But everything that I have is Affinity. So, like, okay, I cast... the Thopter, I forget what it's called, Thought Monitor, right? I draw 5 cards. Oh no, I drew 2 more 7-drop. Like, you're going to get to a point where you cycle through your deck really fast, and you have a board presence that's redonkulous. And it's also, like, you can't melt this down. Like, there's 7 drops, you know?
Yeah, okay. I mean, if we're talking about specifically in the context of 7-drop Affinity cards, I mean, okay, sure. I mean,
is that a winning strategy? I don't know, but that's what they're talking about.
Yeah. I mean, I can totally understand, like, okay, you play this and then you're revolving around your, all these, Affinity cards. But then I mean, is there a high enough density of playable Affinity cards that if this card is not on the table, that those cards are playable? Do you know what I mean? Like,
well, historically, yes. Like, people have been playing Frogmite and stuff. Like, so I'm going to say, yeah. Like, there is a world where these cards are good. It's just coming up with the proper build, I think, is going to be the big thing. And we were just talking about it on the Discord. If you're not a part of the Discord, there's a link below. Join the Discord. How 8cast right now just won a challenge playing my boy Giraffe the Fleshlight. So I think for me, like I don't know, I like looking at these different kinds of ways. This is also, it is a blue card technically, but it can't be pyroblasted, so there's that. Also doesn't pitch to force, so there's that. So I don't know. It's this card's interesting because also like casting 4, 5, and 6 creatures will like at least get you closer to being able to cast that 7-drop in your hand. I don't know.
I mean, I'll say Affinity was not in my head when I was like looking at this card of like how it could be playable. So like if it's playable in that like that one archetype to then snowball, it's just like I'd be curious if the best way to do it is like if the best version of a deck that is doing that, where you're just like playing these 7-drops and then just ancestraling for 0 mana across all of these cards that then draw cards and then continually draw more cards, like that like I feel like that play pattern incentivizes you to just like be like Affinity with a combo finish is Affinity that like, just spams the board and then passes the turn. Like maybe it's good enough to just do that. But I mean, if it's, I guess that's fine. I don't know. Like that doesn't strike me as like something incredibly powerful outside of like if you're gold fishing, because if you have to play a bunch of Affinity cards, then okay, is just a bunch of meat on board enough for this format? I mean, maybe, I don't know. Like, can your Affinity deck beat an Atraxa on the table that like would otherwise stunt your 4/4s? Or can it beat, like, is there enough protection to be able to beat a combo deck if you're playing all of these colorless cards and you can support Force of Wills, but like, is that enough disruption?
Yeah, like, I mean, these are all like inquiring minds want to know questions. Like, I think the answer is yes. You can get past an Atraxa thanks to stuff like, like okay, they drew like 4 cards off of Atraxa, but you just drew like 9, right? And you probably played them all for free. So like, I think there's a race to be had there, and Kappa Cannoneer is part of that answer. And then you also have like Aether Spellbomb, stuff like that. There's other cards that allow you. And this is all Magical Christmas Land until we actually get a chance to test this card out. But it is an intriguing card to me to at least to try and build around.
Yeah, I mean, if it shows up, I'd be curious to see if that actually is viable.
It's also not an artifact. So again, like artifact hate to that particular card is not going to happen.
Yeah. I'm not totally sold, but I can see where people would be like, yes, this has a home.
Yeah.
I just don't know if I believe in that home, but it's not nothing.
All right. Strix Serenade is a 1 blue mana instant that says counter target artifact, creature, or planeswalker. Its controller creates a 2/2 blue bird creature token with flying. Initially, I look at stuff like this and I'm like, nah, not good enough. But the fact that this says creature, artifact, or planeswalker, like any planeswalker you counter with this, you net positive, right? Like you're just like, oh, did you cast like a Narset and I gave you a bird instead? If you counter a what's called think about the things you'd be trying to counter with Spell Snare, right? Like if you counter Orcish Bowmaster with this, you're happy. I don't know. I think this is a card that we could that could see play at least in sideboards. I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, honestly, I'm not a believer in this card. Not that, it might not have a place, but I know that it's like, we can't really compare it to Swan Song because it's doing different things, but I don't think that the format is in a place where these 3, like catching these 3 things in exchange for giving them a 2/2 flyer is a reasonable exchange. And partially is also because it's sort of competing in my mind with Consign to Memory, which I actually can see a clear home across multiple decks that I would want that type of counterspell, where it's like, I don't feel that Strix Serenade does. Now, maybe there would have been a world where like I would have been happy to have something like this as a 1 mana counterspell for Planeswalkers back when people were playing the like 4 Narset, 4 Teferi, some number of Savine's Reclamation deck. but even then, maybe not, because this thing can't counter both the Planeswalkers and the Savine's Wreck. So like there's some tension there where it's like, okay, you counter it, but then they can just continue to jam anyway. So I am not sold on this. Like if it shows up, like I guess I'm not going to be surprised. It's a 1-mana counter spell, but like in the way that Swan Song hasn't shown up because the trade-off is just not good enough for what it does, I also don't think that this is good enough for what it does. So I'm not a believer in this until there's some kind of vast metagame shift that would really require you to have a 1-mana answer to multiple versions of these 3 card types, which I just don't think there is right now. Because, and it goes back to, I'm already not convinced that you can spend mana on counter magic these days.
That's fair.
Right.
Yeah.
So at a baseline, it's like you already
this
have
costs
to
one too many.
like this card has it trades, and what it's presumably trading on efficiency is giving your opponent plus a card, which is a 2/2 flyer. But the context of the format we're in is not that you're getting the advantage of the efficiency anyway.
Yeah.
In my point of view, counter magic can't cost mana anymore. So the fact that it costs mana means that I'm the one who's already making the concession by putting counter magic that costs mana in my deck. So if anything, I should be getting the benefit because I'm spending mana on counter magic for the thing. Does that make sense?
It does.
Because the constraints of the format don't allow for mana that is contingent upon spending mana, right? Like, yes, we've seen hardcast Force of Negations and hardcast Force of Wills, but they're not in your deck presuming that you're going to spend mana on them. They're playable because they don't cost mana. Yeah. So the fact that this does is already me making the concession, not you making the getting the bad trade on efficiency. So like the card is dead if you don't act. So not only is it not doing anything if you don't act, but also I'm the one making the concession of adding mana, of having a counter spell that costs mana in my deck. So giving you the plus side when I'm already making the concession makes it feel like it's not a playable card.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's move on to Sink into Stupor. Sink into Stupor is a instant for 1 and 2 blue, and it says return target non-land, target spell or non-land permanent an opponent controls to its owner's hand. Full stop. No, it's also a land. It's also a blue mana source called Soporific Springs. And you can pay 3 life to have it enter the battlefield untapped. So it's a double face card that it basically has Boomerang on one side, Bolt Land on the other side.
It has better than Boomerang because you can bounce a spell.
Yes, also spells.
So I think rather than us hashing this out again, I think we should just copy and paste what we talked about in the white cards episode and put it at double speed. Yeah, that's
fair. Basically, this card is going to enable combo decks moving, and we can move on from there. So that means next card is Tomio meets the Story Circle, which we did talk about in our 3 cards episode, our sort of like spoiler to spoilers episode. But we'll talk about this real fast. It is a 2-mana enchantment saga. It says for the first one, until your next turn, whenever a creature attacks you or a planeswalker you control, it gets -2, -0 until a turn. Chapter 2, discard a number of cards and then investigate twice for each card discarded this way. And then 3 is shuffle up to 3 target cards from your graveyard into your library. Like I said, we've talked about this card already, but Phil, it's a 1 card, technically 2 because you want the second one in there. But this is a 1 card win condition for the grindiest of grind decks.
Yeah, I mean, we talked about the card in that episode where we covered those 3 cards early on. I mean, I'm interested in this card. I will probably test this card. It will probably not be good enough. But the one aspect that I don't remember if we talked about in one aspect that I haven't had any meaningful conversations really with too many people about, like what this card could do that we haven't really considered, is the second chapter, discard any number of cards, then investigate twice for each card discarded this way. If you're a deck that's just looking to discard your hand and make a bunch of permanents, now I don't know what that deck looks like or what that deck is, but the fact that on turn 2, you can, or on turn 1, depending on the deck that you're playing, on turn 2, you can play this, and then on turn 3, you go to the second chapter, you still have mana open, you can dump effectively your whole hand and make anywhere from 12 to 14 clues. Now, just being able to make 12 to 14 squares of cardboard like for that many game pieces for 0 mana that early in the game feels like there is something potentially busted to be had. Now, I don't know what that is. I haven't really explored what that could look like.
Let's ask Mufuz
like
Van Gogh about that.
Well, the thing is, like a deck like that is too all in for the stuff that I like to play, so I haven't explored it. Yeah. But at the same time, I can understand that 2 mana on turn 2 and then 0 mana on turn 3 make 14 pieces of cardboard and discard your whole hand as a potential, which is potentially where your hand would want to be, give it for some number of decks. That's nothing to me, that there is something, there is potentially something there, because that is a uniquely insane effect. Right? Like discard your whole hand, generate 14 game pieces. That's insane. That coming out of my mouth, generate 14 game pieces for 0 mana sounds incredibly good. So I imagine that there's maybe a way to abuse that in a way that like, I don't know what it looks like, but
Aether spell, what is it? Aether Grid Hub, whatever that thing is that like taps you can tap artifacts and do damage to your opponent.
Yeah, I mean, I'm also like on the side of like, I don't know, maybe there's a world of like, we're in Riddler or something, and it goes to the second, you go turn 1 Riddler, and then if you untap, I don't know, I really don't know, but like the idea of like that many game pieces,
the thing that like does damage per artifact that enters the battlefield or something. Yeah, you're not wrong.
Or something. The fact that you can generate that volume of game pieces that early in the game for that little mana is just so unique that I can't think of anything else that's even remotely close to anything like it. And it being a unique game piece in that way makes me think that there's some kind of degenerate something that can be done with it that I'm just not thinking of. So I would challenge our listeners to explore that space a little bit, because I don't know what it is, but it would seem strange to me if there isn't anything to explore there.
Good luck griefing my hand if I don't have one.
Wow.
All right. Ugin's Binding for 2 and a blue. It is an instant with Devoid. Says returned target non-land permanent you don't control to its owner's hand. Then it also says, when you cast a colorless spell with mana value 7 or greater, you may exile Ugin's Binding from your graveyard. When you do, return each non-land permanent you don't control to its owner's hand.
I mean, this is more the card that I would think like has space and affinity. Like, I get that 3 mana is a lot, but if you're in Soul Land territory, it's really a 2-drop as a bounce spell that like, if you're in the tempo space of like cheap creatures anyway, to like get in some damage. And then every one of those affinity creatures just represents a Cyclonic Rift. Like, whenever you want it, like that's not bad. The other space that I was thinking of is like, I've seen a bunch of people like exploring with like Phyrexian Dreadnought. And I mean, we gotta like the idea that if there's a mono blue Phyrexian Dreadnought deck to be had, I mean, granted, like every Dreadnought deck is always going to be at some point a concession that you're playing something in tier 3. But
yes,
if you're in this sort of space, there's the card that I was thinking of is forgetting the name of it, but it's the 7 mana colorless spell that protects a creature with power.
Draws
the instant.
Yes, otherworldly something.
We can pull it up on screen.
Yeah.
I can't remember the name of it, but it's a free counter spell if you control a creature with, I think, power 7 or greater or something like that. That I remember people will use in Turbo Depths, and like the idea that if you have this as a bounce spell for a deck that like is interested in having at least generalized removal, that having a free counter spell that also just nukes somebody's board, and then you're looking to get the game over relatively fast is not nothing. Like maybe this is all too contingent on playing bad cards alongside this card.
Not of this world. Not of this world.
That's what I was thinking of. But like, I mean, there's also this the space of like I don't know. I mean, it's mana value 7 or greater, not mana value, not power great or 7 or greater. But then Not of This World is power 7 or greater, I think, right? So maybe there's just not enough here. Like maybe the pieces around this card are just not there. Outside of like, the obvious, like, okay, yeah, your Fado draws you or whatever that would have nuked my board anyway. Now nukes my board for real.
Yeah.
But like whatever, the game is over regardless. So maybe this card doesn't have a home, but because it's devoid, it also can't be pitched to force. So like your blue count is also being conceded in some concession. So I'm not totally sure. Like if this shows up, I imagine that it'll be good enough to like have that overwhelming effect. But I don't think this is like showing up in like just generically in like random things. Like this is like part of what you're doing in a meaningful way, or it's just it doesn't exist in the format.
Yeah, you're not like playing this because you need to bounce one permanent and then like, whoops, I got 7 drop and you cyclonic rifted your opponent. All right, so final card is Volatile Storm Drake. For 1 and a blue, it is a creature Drake, 3/2. It has flying and hexproof from activated and triggered abilities. When Volatile Stormdrake enters the battlefield, exchange control of Volatile Stormdrake and target creature an opponent controls. If you do, you get 4 energy, then sacrifice that creature unless you pay an amount of energy equal to its mana cost. So I was looking at this card and thinking, this is a cheaper version of Gilded Drake that, like, stops lands from throwing a 20/20 at you, if they're not paying attention. It's Gilded Drake for like people on a budget, right? But you had an interesting thing to say about it actually in the pre-show.
So I actually think that this might be better than I actually think that this genuinely might be better than Gilded Drake, in that it's a 3-mana 3/3, or I'm sorry, a 3/3 flyer to your opponent as opposed to a 3/2 flyer with contingent protective ability, like hexproof abilities or whatever. Gilded Drake comes into play. Exchange of a target creatures when your opponent controls. Like, I don't know exactly the ruling, and this is what we were talking about before, where I'm more or less interested in this card, is if you play this new updated Drake and they don't have a creature, because it says when it enters the battlefield, you exchange it with target creature. But if there's no target, does it just fizzle? And if it fizzles, does that mean that you keep it? Because if you keep it as just a 3/2 flyer with the hexproof abilities, then and it doesn't go to your opponent, then that's not a bad rate, because the hexproof abilities are not nothing in this format, because both Leyline Binding and Solitude are both triggered abilities. So it having hexproof from meaningful disruption or meaningful removal that is played in the format is not nothing.
And Orcish Bowmaster,
also,
and
Orcish Bowmaster. I think that the hexproof line is like subtle enough, but like meaningful enough that if we're just interested in having a 3/2 flyer in space as like, yes, it's good, it can steal the creature and do the thing that it like is obviously set up to do, and like, maybe make a powerful exchange because you're probably getting a better creature than your 3/2 flyer. But even at a baseline where you're not getting that type of exchange, is it being a 3/2 flyer that also lines up well against a lot of removal that is currently played in the format? Is that good enough? Now, I don't know exactly how the ruling works, where if there isn't a target to exchange, that they just get it and you get nothing. I don't know if that's how it works, but I would be interested to see what the ruling technically is on it, because if it does fizzle and you just get to keep your 3/2 flyer, that means that the baseline is a 3/2 flyer that might be good against relevant removal. Yeah. So, that's more than I thought the card could do before.
Also,
so if
Phil, a thing to just drop is, let's say your opponent reanimates an Archon of Cruelty, right? This takes the Archon of Cruelty and turns it into a 3/2 flyer as opposed to like something gigantic, because you have to sacrifice the creature. So you still do get to exchange, even if you don't have a butt ton of energy. You have dealt with the problem on the other side of the board. I think that's worth mentioning.
Say that again.
So if you take whatever your opponent has, if you deem this is worth stealing, right? You just have to sacrifice it if you don't have enough energy. It's not like they get it back, like it goes to the graveyard,
Yeah. I mean, you go down the turn, but then, there's also maybe the space that you're, playing the energy stuff, and then there's something to be had with the energy. Yeah. Like, I don't know. There's enough contextual pieces that, like, if this shows up, if that ruling goes the way that I'm thinking it does, where you wouldn't actually exchange the creature if there's no target, like, okay, if this shows up, like, it's not like it's a bad rate. The hexproof abilities have some amount of relevancy. Like, I'm not overwhelmed by this card, but I'm also not like, oh, this is unplayable. It's
also interesting because you have to think, like, do I want to slam this on turn 2 under my opponent's creature, or maybe they're going to cast something I'm going to want to get rid of,
And the one deck that has played Gilded Drake is the like Esper Vile deck. Now, whether or not that's even playable at all anymore because Bowmaster exists, I don't know. But like, I do think that this is just straight up a strict upgrade to Gilded Drake.
Yeah.
And being able to flicker your own thing to get your thing back, like, in all those shenanigans, like, oh, that's nothing either, because this thing, if the has the ruling where you actually get to keep it, if they don't, like, having the hexproof abilities is relevant against a couple different versions of decks. So
yeah,
Cool. Well, that does it for blue. Thank you for watching, everybody. If you like this video, please like, subscribe, comment. If you can support us on Patreon, you can go to patreon.com/EternalDurdles. We really wish you would. But with that said, thank you everyone for watching, and have a good one. Before you go, I need some help. Please subscribe to this channel and do your part to help sustain the legacy content ecosystem. Just subscribing to this channel goes a long way to reminding YouTube that people love and support this format. Now, if you really want to go the extra mile, you should think about supporting us through Patreon. Both the links for subscription and Patreon are right here. And if you're listening on an audio format, you can go to patreon.com/EternalDurdles. Thanks so much for watching.